All right, welcome to a deep dive experience crafted just for you. Today we're going to explore something a little different, a Bengali ghost story.
Hmm.
And not just any ghost story, but one that's deeply rooted in the cultural nuances of Bengal.
Interesting.
We're looking at "Array Shamka," which translates to that terrible night from the Bengali online magazine Hio Famankare, or Penholder, as we might say.
I see.
And this particular story takes us right into the heart of Kolkata during Kali Puja. That's a time when the veil between the living and the dead, well, it gets a bit thin, shall we say, especially on the night known as Boop Chaturdashi.
I see. Kali Puja, that's a huge festival in Bengal, isn't it? For listeners who might not be familiar, it's kind of like Thanksgiving or Christmas, a time for big family reunions and lots of celebration.
Exactly. And the story starts with our main character, Abhinash. He's just arrived in Kolkata after being away for a whole year. You know that feeling, right? Coming home after a long time, the anticipation, the excitement to see your family.
Oh, absolutely. I can only imagine. It sets such a warm and joyful tone, which makes what's about to happen even more, well, unsettling.
Right, so picture this. Abhinash lands at Dum Dum Airport. His flight's late, there are crowds everywhere, and he can't find a taxi to save his life. It's travel chaos.
Yeah.
Then out of nowhere, this lone taxi appears and pulls up, driven by a man named Sitesh.
And this is where things start to take a bit of a turn.
Oh, yeah.
The way the story describes Sitesh, well, it's enough to send shivers down your spine. Hollow eyes, gaunt features, and these almost old-fashioned clothes. You get the sense that the author is doing more than just describing him. They're setting a mood, you know?
Ooh, yeah, I'm picking up what you're putting down. Definitely ominous vibes.
Right. It makes me wonder, is this just a vivid description, or is it a clever bit of foreshadowing?
Good point. And if his appearance wasn't unsettling enough, Sitesh starts talking about Boot Chaturdashi, the night when, according to folklore, spirits roam the earth. At first, Abhinash kind of brushes it off, but as they drive, Sitesh's words and actions just get weirder.
See, this is where the story really taps into Bengali folklore, and for the listener, this is important, because Bhut Chaturdashi, it's not just some made-up spooky element, it's a real belief, a part of the culture. The idea is that on this particular night, spirits can come back to the world of the living. And not just to spook people, but to try and fulfill desires that were left unfinished when they were alive.
Okay, now that is creepy. Makes you wonder, what is Sitesh so desperate to fulfill? And as if things weren't already strange enough, Sitesh veers off the main road. He takes Abhinash to this deserted area and eventually stops in a house. And this house, it's completely isolated.
Yeah, the house, it's almost like a character itself in the story, because on the outside, it's beautifully decorated for Kali Puja, all bright and festive, but inside, it's dilapidated and eerie. Oh, and did I mention there's a graveyard just a stone's throw away?
Whoa. Okay, red flags galore.
Ah,
It's like the story is dropping all these clues like a trail leading to something really bad.
it is.
I'm hooked. I have to know, what is Sitesh's connection to this house?
Yeah.
And why on earth is he taking Avinash there?
Right. These are the questions that keep you on the edge of your seat. Like, was Sitesh waiting for Abhinash specifically? Is there some deeper purpose to this meeting? It's like the author is inviting us, the readers, to play detective, trying to solve the mystery before the truth is revealed. And trust me, the truth, it's horrifying. It really is a terrifying truth. It's like the story is saying, hey, don't dismiss these old beliefs so quickly. Like maybe if Abhinash had taken Bhut Chaturdashi a little more seriously, he wouldn't have been so vulnerable to Sitesh's, well, influence.
You're right. It's like he walks right into a trap, blinded by like modern skepticism or something. But I'm also fascinated by how the story uses all those little clues, those hints about what's to come.
Oh, absolutely. Those tiny details we talked about earlier, like the hollow eyes and gaunt features, they take on a whole new meaning once we know who Sitesh really is. The author really knows how to use foreshadowing, adds a layer of suspense to the whole thing.
Totally. At first, we just think Sitesh is a creepy driver. But those little details, they make you question everything. And then there's that abandoned house isolated in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, that house, it's almost like its own character, right? It's decorated for Kali Puja, which is all about light and celebration, but at the same time, it's surrounded by decay and death. It's like this contrast, this struggle between tradition and darkness.
That's interesting. It's like the house represents a part of the city that's been forgotten, a place where the old ways still have power. And Abhinash, coming from the modern world, he's like an outsider.
I like that interpretation. And it makes me think about the graveyard. It's not just there to be spooky. It's a reminder that death is always present, even when we're celebrating life.
Ooh, that sends chills down my spine. Thinking about Abhinash being lured to this place, he's expecting a happy homecoming, and instead he finds himself face to face with death. Adds another layer to the whole thing.
For sure. And then the ending, right. The police are completely stumped by that bloodless corpse that keeps turning up. Makes you wonder, is Satesh's spirit trapped? Is he forced to repeat this horrible ritual every Boot Chatterdashi?
Yeah, the recurring corpse is so creepy. Makes me think about cycles of violence, how the past can come back to haunt us. It's as if Satesh's actions, even though he's dead, they're still disrupting the peace.
Right. That cyclical aspect really adds to the story, like a warning that some actions, especially those that disrespect the dead or go against tradition, they can have consequences that last a long time.
So it's not just about Abhinash being unlucky, or about how evil Sitesh is. It's something bigger, something embedded in the story itself.
Exactly. It's about the balance between the world we know and the supernatural world, and what can happen when that balance is disrupted. Forces that are beyond our control are unleashed. Makes you think about what you believe about the unseen world, you know?
Totally. And I think that's what makes this story so powerful. It's not just scary. It makes you think about the power of belief, the consequences of our actions, and the mysteries we might never understand. So what resonates most with you about that terrible night? Is it the suspense, the Bengali folklore, or those big questions about good and evil? For me, it's definitely how the story mixes what we know with what's unsettling. We've all heard ghost stories before, right?
Right.
But there's just something about those little cultural details, like Boot Chatterdashi, and that fear of messing with tradition, adds a whole other layer.
Yeah, it's not just about being scared. It's like we're getting a glimpse into a different way of seeing the world, a different way of looking at the supernatural.
Right.
It makes you wonder, what are we missing in our own cultures? What beliefs are we ignoring without even trying to understand them?
Ooh, that's a great point. We tend to think of ghost stories as just entertainment. But this one feels different, like it's a piece of history, a story that people really believe.
Exactly. And it reminds us that sometimes the line between what's real and what's not, well, it can be pretty blurry,
Hmm.
especially in a place like Bengal, where folklore and mythology are so important.
Speaking of folklore, you mentioned that the idea of spirits needing sacrifices, it's not just a Bengali thing, right?
Right.
It's something you see in a lot of different cultures.
Oh, absolutely. Think about ancient Greek myths or vampire stories from Europe. The idea of giving something to a spirit, either to make them happy or to get something from them, it comes up again and again.
Hmm.
I think it shows how much humans have always feared the unknown. We want to control it or at least bargain with it, even if we don't understand it.
It makes you wonder, is that just a human thing? Trying
Yeah.
to understand death and the afterlife by telling stories and creating rituals?
I think so. Stories like The Terrible Night show us how different cultures try to answer those big questions.
Yeah.
They give us a way to make sense of the unseen world and how we fit into it.
And even though this story doesn't give us all the answers, I actually think that's part of why it's so good. It makes you think about those mysteries, those spaces between believing and not believing.
That's the magic of a good ghost story. It stays with you, makes you think about what you believe, your own culture, all the stories that shaped how you see the world.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive, I have one last thought. If you were Abhinash at that airport, knowing everything we know now about Boot Chatterdashi and all the dangers, would you have done anything differently?
That's a good question. Would we be more careful, more open to the warnings? Would we actually believe in the supernatural? Or would we stick to our doubts, even when things start getting strange?
It's kind of creepy to think about.
Yeah.
But maybe that's the biggest lesson from all of this. That terrible night isn't just a spooky story. It's a reminder that we should be curious about the world, be humble, and maybe even have a healthy dose of fear. Who knows what we might find if we look a little deeper?
Thanks for joining us on this journey into Bengali folklore. We hope this deep dive has sparked your imagination and given you a new appreciation for stories. They can take us to different worlds and make us question everything we thought we knew.